So it has come... I had to check my microphone settings. It's Project Pocket Monster, Rebalancing Pokemon, Part 6, I do believe. In the last part, we covered like Victory Bell, Poliwrath, a little bit of Machamp, and the Golems. Wow, I remembered them all off the top of my head. I'm actually recording this a few weeks later than that. It's been a while since I've recorded, so I'm not up to speed right now, but we'll get there. What are we doing here? Well, we are going through and we are rebalancing all of the old Pokemon who have been left by the wayside by Game Freak and have been outclassed or made completely irrelevant by something known as power creep. I've explained power creep in all these videos so far, but power creep is when there's new utilities or abilities introduced that make old ones more irrelevant or just completely not part of the meta. Alright, so when we are going through and rebalancing these Pokemon, there are a number of assumptions that we have to make. I already started doing Farfetch'd's part, and then I realized that I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to talk about the assumptions. I need to talk about what we're doing. If you've already seen some of these parts of the videos, you can skip to this time right here, and we'll get you on with the rebalancing. Otherwise, it'll probably really benefit you to listen to these assumptions that we have, since they directly affect how we are going to be changing these Pokemon. The assumptions we're going to make. We're not changing the type chart or type matchups. So, ice is still super effective against grass, water's still neutral against ice, that sort of thing. Not changing any of that. So we're not changing the effects of abilities. This means for abilities that are bad, like Inner Focus and Keen Eye, as you can see right there, we're not changing their effects. They are bad. Inner Focus is a bad ability, Keen Eye is a bad ability, but we're going to leave them the way they are, just for consistency. We're not changing the base power or the PP of moves. We're not going to make Astonish an 80 base power ghost type move. We're not going to make Flare Blitz 200 base power, etc., that sort of thing. Changes, now this is the most important part, is that these changes that we make, they have to fit thematically. We're not going to be doing something as reckless as giving Charizard Storm Drain. Charizard does not get along with water. It makes absolutely no sense for Charizard to get Storm Drain, therefore it's not going to. We're also not going to give Charizard something like, Muddy Water. Like that move doesn't make sense in Charizard's kit, so we're not going to give it access to it. It has to at least make sense. And that brings me to the next assumption, is that these changes, they have to make sense based on previously established lore and Pokédex entries. Farfetch carries this leak, and we'll get there. But this leak he uses is a sword. So, when we think about changes we make to Farfetch, it all has to do with him being a bird holding a sword. So this is also assuming a meta without Mega Evolution? No. This is also assuming a meta without all of the cyclical stuff that Game Freak likes to include or not include or introduce, or all the gimmicks and stuff. So we're talking this is a meta without Mega Evolution, Z-moves, or Dynamaxing / Gigantamaxing. None of that is taken into account when we're talking about the balance of these Pokemon, but considering we want to buff these Pokemon just as they are and not have to alter them or give them evolutions or Mega Evolutions, we are not including those in our balancing. And that about does it. Let's get right into it here. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk about Farfetch'd. I'm ready to talk about Farfetch'd. Look at this thing.
Psych!
I actually already recorded Rapidash's section, so I'm going to pass it off to me. A week or two in the past, I'm going to be wearing different clothes just for the Rapidashes, but that's okay. Just ignore that. Ignore that part. So, Rapidash. Rapidash is pretty underwhelming as a fire type. It's outclassed by a number of different Pokemon. Its best stat being its speed at 105. Doesn't do it any favors. It's outclassed by, oh my god, Salazzle, Darmanitan, Charizard, Typhlosion, like literally probably everything. Rapidash is outclassed by Simisear and Combuskin. That's what it says in this Sun and Moon Pokédex, or Sun and Moon Smogon entry, which is just absolutely sad. It does have access to a number of different coverage moves, Wild Charge, Mega Horn, etc., but all things considered, Rapidash is pretty poor. Being able to absorb, Will-O-Wisps and Burn status is pretty nice. But all things considered, it doesn't have any sort of... Actually, it might have reliable recovery. Hold on, let me check. Rapidash might have Morning Sun. It does have Morning Sun. Now, if we're going to fix Rapidash, there's a couple things that I want to do to make it just slightly better. Not slightly better. Actually make it really pretty good. So, as far as its stats go, I want to give 5 to its attack stat. I want it to be able to hit a little bit harder, bringing it up to speed with some of the power creep, again, that we mentioned that's occurred in these generations. Literally just boosting some Pokemon stats just by a little bit, make it go all the distance. like 105 speed. 105 speed was pretty good in its debut generation, but that has fallen by the wayside all the way in Generation 8. There are Pokemon that are, 140 base speed, 150 base speed, just crazy amounts. So I want to give it 20 points to its speed, putting it at a very, very fast 125. This makes sense for Rapidash. It's said that it can literally go like 0 to 80 or something like that. I'm going to pop the Pokédex entry on the screen. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But Rapidash has crazy acceleration, very, very fast Pokemon that is not reflected by its speed stat. And I think that that is a very wasted opportunity for it. As far as its abilities go, Runaway is one of the worst abilities in the history of ever. It only comes into effect in-game. It doesn't even let you like switch out first or anything like that. So I'm gonna replace Runaway with Reckless. That's just nuts. I just like Reckless on Rapidash. It makes sense. It helps it, etc. etc. Now this is where we get into the meat and potatoes of this Pokemon. So Flash Fire was an ability it previously had. This let it sponge Will-O-Wisps, let it sponge Fire-type attacks, but I think that something else could be better than that. I didn't want to get rid of Flame Body because, like, look at Rapidash. I mean, look, it's literally on fire. But Flash Fire, I wanted to get rid of for a much better ability, a much different ability than it, being Serene Grace. Now, what Serene Grace does is it doubles the effects, or the additional effects, or chance of moves. So if Flare Blitz has a 10% chance to burn, that means that Flare Blitz now has a 20% chance to burn. Rapidash also gets things like Headbutt. Headbutt now has a 60% chance to flinch. Actually, it might not get Headbutt. I'm thinking of Stomp. Now Rapidash can run a Stomp Serene Grace set if it really wants to, as well as having a high chance to burn on a whole bunch of its moves. Serene Grace Bounce helps bounce. It bounces a 60% chance paralysis. So now bounce is actually pretty dang viable. Poison Jab. Rapidash gets Poison Jab. Now it gets a 60% chance to poison the target if it really wants to. You could run a Assault Vest, Serene Grace, Poison Jab, Flare Blitz, Wild Charge, Mega Horn set, and have crazy chances to burn or poison the opposing Pokemon, which is really cool, especially off a base 125 speed. This means it outspeeds a whole bunch of Scarfers. It puts it in the same speed tier as Weavile, and actually makes it a whole bunch better. It's also the only fire type with Serene Grace as well, giving it a niche in that retrospect. Now, as far as its moves go, I'm not going to give it a crazy amount of different moves. I'm going to give it Blaze Kick, Fire Lash, Heat Crash, and Burn Up. A lot of these are just Generation 8 moves. Heat Crash, it's a horse. I mean, you ever had a horse fall on you? Probably not, but I gotta believe it hurts. Burn Up, I think, makes sense for it. Blaze Kick, literally, I mean, that I shouldn't even explain that one. And Fire Lash, and I also want to give it Jump Kick. Jump Kick just because it's a horse. Horses jump pretty high. They kick pretty hard. Jump Kick makes sense to me. Not a crazy amount of moves I want to give Rapidash, but I think that it already has the tools it needs to succeed. So all of that being said, the additional moves we give it, as well as the hitting harder, as well as its newfound speed tier and new abilities, make Rapidash very unique and interesting when compared to other fire-type Pokemon. Its new speed tier of 125 is super good, hits a little bit harder. Reckless, if you wanted to run a Flare Blitz Reckless Life Orb set, you can do that. If you want to run a fast Serene Grace Stomp Bounce Poison Jab set, you can do that as well. Being the only fire type with Serene Grace separates Rapidash a lot from its other fire type competitors, and being put in this new speed tier also helps it out absolutely a ton. And it also makes sense as this super fast fire type horse thing, yeah. Now, Galarian Rapidash hasn't been out for a crazy amount of time, but I can already tell that it's not as good. As per usual, I want to sort of make, the Galarian or Alola forms, I want to make them counterparts, and I want to keep their base stat totals the same as the original Cantonian or otherwise form of the Pokemon. That being said, for Galarian Rapidash, I'm also going to boost its attack by 5, and I'm also going to boost its speed by 20. It is a very fast horse. This makes sense. Runaway and Anticipation, both of them aren't very good abilities, so we're going to get rid of those two for the exact same abilities we gave Rapidash, being Reckless and Serene Grace. So Galarian Rapidash with Serene Grace, Zen Headbutts, Play Roughs, 60% chance to flinch, 20% chance to lower the attack with that speed tier, makes Galarian Rapidash a lot better than it previously was. I have no doubt that Galarian Rapidash is not a very good Pokemon, just because Psychic and Fairy are two usually special types, and them being physical doesn't really help at all too much. But having these chances with these extra effects, I think it goes a long way to help it. I want to keep Pastel Veil because, again, it was its signature ability at one point. And I also think that, having Rapidash has Flame Body and Galarian Rapidash having Pastel Veil just sort of separates them a little bit further. Now, we're not going to give it any sort of Fire-type move that we gave regular Rapidash, but we are still going to give it Jump Kick because, I think it just makes sense. It's a horse, it jumps, it kicks. This makes Galarian Rapidash quite literally the Psychic Fairy counterpart to regular Rapidash. They have the exact same stat spread, some of the exact same abilities, as well as a whole bunch of different coverage moves, but because of their typing, they can be played a number of different ways. This brings us to Slowbro, who is already fine as he is. Now, Slowbro is super, super good. Water Psychic isn't a great defensive typing, but you look at its stats. 95 HP, 110 defense, even 80 Spadef is actually pretty solid, as well as having 100 special attack. Slowbro gets access to a number of really good tools. Oblivious is really good. Notably, you're probably going to be running Regenerator, so Slowbro can come in. It's a defensive pivot. You come in, you eat a hit, and you force it out with potentially a Scald, a Psychic, Toxic. It gets access to Slack Off as well, and keeping itself healthy with, Slack Off and Regenerator. Slowbro's a very, very good defensive pivot. I don't think Slowbro needs to be changed at all, and I think Slowbro is actually sort of an evergreen Pokemon. It's always going to be pretty good. It may not be the best defensive water type in the game, but it certainly has a niche over a lot of other defensive water types, in the fact that it has Regenerator and it gets access to a number of high damage special attacking moves. Even in Generation 8 now, it gets the ability to teleport. So having the ability to pivot while also having Regenerator, potentially some Wish support. Slowbro is totally fine as it is. I'm not going to be touching it. It is a very good Pokemon already, and it already separates itself from the other water psychic types of the generation, being Starmie, and if you watched my last video, Golduck. So that brings us into Magneton, and usually I'm not talking about not fully evolved Pokemon, but I just wanted to say that Magneton and Magnezone, by extension, we're not going to be changing them at all. Being an Eviolite user with Sturdy, with Magnet Pull, with Analytic, and with that high of defenses as well as special attack, Magneton is totally fine. It can trap steel types, it can hit them with HP Fire, certain things like Skarmory, Corviknight, they really don't want to be kept in and hit with a Thunderbolt or a Volt Switch or something like that. Magneton is already very good, and Magnezone is even a little bit better than Magneton. So we're not going to be touching them. Into the next Pokemon, which I believe... Oh, it's so bad. Oh, you're so bad, dude. Okay. Okay. So, Farfetch'd is a Pokemon that exists. It has been consistently, and I usually don't do this, pretty horrible. Red, blue, yellow. It's just a quite inferior flying type. Gold and silver. Isn't good. Plain and simple. I am of the opinion that as Pokemon Red and Blue were about to be released, Farfetch'd accidentally spilled some ink on the suit of one of the most important Game Freak staff members. Since then, they've hated Farfetch'd and did everything they could to make this thing suck as much as possible on the battlefield. I like that one. Terrible stats, a shallow move pool, and completely outclassed. Horrible Pokemon. Unsurprisingly, an awful choice because its stats are pitiful and it's hopelessly outclassed by many other flying types in the tier. Granted, this tier is the lowest possible tier. There's a lot of things that need to be done to buff Farfetch'd. Right off the bat, usually when looking at Farfetch'd, I would have considered to give him a fighting flying type. I think this makes sense. However, because of the introduction of Galarian Farfetch'd and because of the introduction of Sirfetch'd, I am hesitant to give Farfetch'd a fighting type, because then that just doesn't separate him as much from his fighting type British counterparts. So we are actually going to stay with normal flying for Farfetch'd. So its abilities are Defiant, Inner Focus, and Keen Eye. Defiance, actually a fairly good ability. If it gets intimidated, it does get a boost of +1 to its attack stat. The other thing is that Defiant usually activates on something like a Sticky Webs, or if, Farfetch'd, let's say he gets hit with a Liquidation and it gets the defense down, even though he probably won't survive that Liquidation, that means that his attack stat will go up by 2. So, Defiant's a great ability. Inner Focus and Keen Eye both have to go, though. So I'm opting And these are the biggest changes that we're going to make to Farfetch'd. I want to get rid of Inner Focus for Sniper. And I want to get rid of Keen Eye for Intrepid Sword. Now I know. You saw Intrepid Sword, you got triggered. I know. Zacian is a very, very good Pokemon. It is absolutely busted. However, it is a Fairy Steel type. It is base 170 attack. Now, Farfetch'd, on the other hand, we want to give him 7 more points into his attack stat. A 97 base attack, boosted by 1 right off the rip, is way, way less broken. This makes sense to me. It separates Farfetch'd from a number of other flying types in its debut generation, as well as, into the future of Pokemon. With Intrepid Sword, Farfetch'd gets a boost, and it actually brings its attack stat to relatively respectable levels. Not having to set up a Swords Dance with Farfetch'd is a really big deal, and especially because we're giving it a little bit more bulk into its HP. I want to buff it by 11 points, and I also want to buff his speed stat to a whopping 102. Now, this is 1 point faster than Pidgeot, or at least my Pidgeot. This is 9 points slower than my Fearow. And we'll get to Dodrio, but it will be slower than Dodrio. But what Farfetch'd has above those Pokemon is Intrepid Sword. So that brings it to a total of 447, but technically that's a little bit higher because Intrepid Sword will boost Farfetch'd's base attack. Now, why did I give it Sniper? Well, Farfetch'd's hold item is the stick. It ups Farfetch'd's critical hit ratio chance by a good margin. And with Sniper, that means that critical hits are doing more damage. So you can still opt to run Farfetch'd as this critical hit machine in the essence of Persian or Absol or something like that. Or you could run Intrepid Sword because it's just probably a better ability. So Farfetch'd already gets access to a number of really good moves. First Impression, U-Turn, Knockoff, Leaf Blade, and honestly, you'll probably use Farfetch'd as not necessarily a wall breaker, but more as like a fast offensive, almost revenge killer probably. So we're just gonna get right into its move pool, the stuff I want to give it. So being a normal type, I think that it makes sense for Farfetch'd to have access to Fake Out, as well as coverage moves in Sacred Sword, Breaking Swipe, Razor Leaf, X-Scissor, and Psycho Cut. And setup and support, I want to give it Grass Whistle as well, just because it's like a stick, it's like a grass plant leak, it could be like a flute almost. I just thought it was a pretty neat idea for Farfetch'd to have access to some sort of tool like that. Sacred Sword, we talked about how Farfetch'd is a sword-wielding Pokemon. Breaking Swipe, Swipe Sword. Razor Leaf, it already gets Leaf Blade, but Razor Leaf actually hits 2 Pokemon, so if you wanted to use Farfetch'd and VGC, you know what I'm saying. X-Scissor, high critical hit chance, and Psycho Cut, high critical hit chance. X-Scissor completely makes sense to me. Psycho Cut's a little bit of a reach, but I think that a lot of other Pokemon get access to Psycho Cut who don't necessarily need it either, so I think it's fine to give it to Farfetch'd. Now, what this does is it opens up Farfetch'd to a whole world of possibilities. You could run it as a critical hit machine with a sniper and a stick, but it's way faster and it hits a little bit harder at 97 attack versus not just base 90. Or you could run it as an Intrepid Sword user with a boosted Fake Out, a boosted First Impression, or coverage moves. In Brave Bird, Sacred Sword, you could run Facade, you could run Return. A lot of things that Farfetch'd can dish out are now boosted because of this 1.5 times attack multiplier. He's basically getting stab on everything that he does, which makes Farfetch'd very, very unique. Now, 447 is not great. I only added a little bit of HP to him so he could potentially take a priority move, potentially take an E-Speed from something, potentially take an Ice Shard, or a Vacuum Wave or a Mach Punch or something like that. Odds are he probably won't anyway, but since Farfetch'd already gets access to these 2 forms of priority in First Impression and Fake Out, I think that it doesn't really matter. Farfetch'd is a revenge killer. It's not the greatest flying type, and it still by no means is, but giving him Intrepid Sword sets him apart from a lot of these other flying types. And that's really all we're trying to do here. We're trying to take a Pokemon and give it some sort of niche, some sort of unique thing about it in order to put it above something else. So even if it's not going to be used as much, it at least has a tiny kernel of a chance to be used on a team effectively. And that's really what we're going for. We're not trying to make every Pokemon broken. We're not trying to give Farfetch'd base, 570 stats. It is a tiny duck. It's meant to be, this archetype of a Pokemon. So let's let it do it a little bit better. Hey you guys, if you made it this far, that means you've hit the halfway point of the video. If you're enjoying, please click that like button. If you really like the content, please subscribe to me as well. Every little bit of support helps. I am a one-man show. I do all the editing. I do all the uploading, the whole shebang. I try to do it all myself, and it really means a lot to me. All the support means everything to me. But I'm not going to waste your time anymore. We're going to get back into the balancing, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. So when we get to Galarian Farfetch'd, it's an interesting case, because I wouldn't have wanted to buff Galarian Farfetch'd at all. As you can see on the screen, it's actually a Little Cup Mon. And it's a very, very good Little Cup Mon, mind you, because 95 base attack is very good. But for consistency's sake, I feel like I have to buff Galarian Farfetch'd to regular Farfetch'd's level, but not enough to overshadow its evolution in Sirfetch'd. So, all of that being said, I want to give the same 11 points to Galarian Farfetch'd HP. I want to give him 14 points into his defense, 13 points into his SPDEF, and 22 points into its speed. So 27 of those points aren't going toward its speed like it did in regular Farfetch'd. Galarian Farfetch'd has this giant leak thing, so I think it should just naturally be slower. This extra speed, this extra bulk, lets it potentially be an Eviolite user. Not necessarily a fantastic Eviolite user, but a scrappy close combat from base 95 attack holding an Eviolite. These are girder levels of damage. Think of a Galarian Farfetch'd as a, sort of like a girder. Or maybe even like a Machoke, like a not fully evolved Pokemon that can still potentially find a niche. Now, Steadfast and Scrappy, they're both fine abilities. Scrappy's probably the better of the two, but I also want to give Galarian Farfetch'd Defiant. Now, Defiant actually will be able to proc with Galarian Farfetch'd on Sticky Webs as well as on Intimidate users because it's not a flying type, because it's not immune to these sort of hazards, and it can actually lead to some pretty crazy, coming in on Sticky Webs, you're already slow, you might as well get the attack boost and then punch a hole in something with Fake Out, First Impression, etc., etc. That being said, I do want to give Galarian Farfetch'd access to a number of moves that regular Farfetch'd now gets, notably Sacred Sword as a stab move, Fake Out, Breaking Swipe, Razor Leaf, X-Scissor, but not Psycho Cut, because I didn't think it makes sense for a fighting type to get Psycho Cut. But I also wanted to give Galarian Farfetch'd access to Grass Whistle, but also I wanted to give it access to Roost. Now, this does mean that Sirfetch'd gets access to Roost, which I think is totally fine. They are birds. Regular Farfetch'd does get Roost. For some reason, Game Freak in Generation 8 had not wanted to give a bunch of flying types Roost. Obviously, Galarian Farfetch'd isn't a flying type, but, you look at Galarian Articuno, Moltres, and Zapdos, they all don't get Roost, but something like Drampa does. It doesn't make any sense. So I figured I can give this thing Roost. It can be a bulky fighting type. It can be an Eviolite user. It has some form of priority. It could, be Defiant. It could be Scrappy. This gives Galarian Farfetch'd a number of different tools. And while it wasn't necessarily my intention to buff Galarian Farfetch'd, I think that, because we buffed regular Farfetch'd, Galarian Farfetch'd sort of deserved some of that love. So we gave him some of the same tools, as well as, sort of carved out its own niche as a not fully evolved fighting type. You heard it here first, folks. Galarian Farfetch'd is the new girder. It has the big thing. It can defog with it. Makes total sense. That being said, we are going to move on to the next Pokemon. Alright, and that brings us into Dodrio. Now, all things considered, I think Dodrio is actually pretty underrated of a Pokemon. Having 110 attack, having 110 speed, as well as having access to something like Swords Dance and Jump Kick, really sort of make Dodrio a pretty prominent flying type wall breaker. The only problem is that it's worse than a lot of other flying types that have been introduced in future generations. That being said, there's not a lot necessarily wrong with Dodrio. It functions totally fine as it is, but if we want to really set it apart from, other flying types, we need to give it some sort of niche in its own right. Now, Right off the bat, we're going to look at Dodrio's abilities. Early Bird is absolutely terrible. Really, really bad ability. It's a Generation 3 staple. They love slapping Early Bird on a bunch of things. But I think it makes sense to give Dodrio Vital Spirit. Now, why does this make sense? Because when two of Dodrio's heads sleep, the other one is awake. So it's always awake. It's never going to sleep totally. Vital Spirit to me makes sense. It means that Dodrio cannot be put to sleep, just period at all. This is where it gets a little interesting. Runaways also have really terrible ability. But I wanted to give it Compound Eyes. Now, you're like, oh, Compound Eyes is for Bug-type Pokemon. How could you give Dodrio Compound Eyes? Well, it's got 3 sets of eyes. It's got 3 heads. It can see 3 different directions, you know? Why would it miss its move if 2 heads could be looking at one and the other could be looking at his blind spot? It's not going to miss. So basically all Compound Eyes means is that Dodrio is always going to be able to hit its jump kick. It's never going to have to miss and crash, and you're never going to have to be sad because of it. And now for the final ability, I actually thought it'd be really interesting. Tangled Feet is not a bad ability, but it's relatively underutilized. Getting rid of Tangled Feet for Moxie. Now, there's not a lot of Pokemon with Moxie, period. As well as there being even less flying types. The only one I think who has Moxie is Honchkrow. Honchkrow may have Moxie. Honchkrow. I spelled it wrong. It does have Moxie. Would you look at that? But yes, so Moxie allows Dodrio, once it gets a kill, because it's primarily a revenge killer or a wall breaker. Once it does that, it's going to be constantly boosting. This sets it apart because now it's fast, it hits hard, as well as can boost its attack stat after knocking out a Pokemon, which is actually really, really cool. So for Dodrio's stats, when looking at it, I knew that it's already pretty good. 110 attack is pretty nice. 110 speed's also pretty nice. But, we should buff this Pokemon's strengths. Now, I decided to give it 15 points into its HP. Just because, again, like Farfetch'd, like I mentioned, having the ability to potentially take a priority hit and live it could mean the difference between winning a game or losing a game. It's not necessarily always going to come in handy, but I think with 3 heads and, 3 hearts and 3 lungs, it makes sense for Dodrio to be a little bit beefier. As well as I want to give it 8 points into speed. Now that might seem like kind of an arbitrary number, and in some senses it is, but this means that it's outspeeding base, not only other base 110s, it's outspeeding base 115 Pokemon, as well as Pokemon that are just creeped above that. 116, 117, 118 puts it in like a perfect middle ground. There's not a lot of Pokemon with base 119 speed. Most of them just go right to 120. But 118 seems like a really good place for Dodrio to sit. It is an ostrich. It runs along the ground at like 40 miles an hour or something like that in one of its Pokédex entries. Making it a little bit faster is totally fine. Now, so we made Dodrio a little bit bulky. It's got a couple of very good abilities for it to utilize now. Compound Eyes and Moxie, particularly, you're probably going to want to run Moxie. Although if you don't want to miss any sort of attack, running Compound Eyes also is a good thing. So as far as the moves I want to give Dodrio. Dodrio is an ostrich. It's got those legs. And I wanted to give Dodrio a moveset revolving around kicking. Because that's something that's really unique as far as, bird flying type Pokemon go. It doesn't have arms, doesn't even have wings, it just kind of got this tail feather thing. But I wanted to give Dodrio, it already gets jump kick, but I wanted to give it high jump kick, I wanted to give it drop kick, I wanted to give it blaze kick, and I also want to give Dodrio the new Generation 8 move, Triple Axle. This opens up Dodrio's coverage a whole bunch. You could run Return, Brave Bird, Triple Axle, high jump kick, and you're hitting everything for neutral damage. Everything for neutral damage. Blaze Kick is a niche option. So Trap Kick is a base 70 grass type move that lowers the target's attack by 1. So Dodrio comes in on a bulky water type. It's able to click Trap Kick, add a -1 attack. It could probably live whatever it wants to throw at it, unless it's like, a special attacker like a Milotic or a Slowbro or something like that. But all that being said, giving Dodrio a number of coverage moves, as well as a better speed tier and better abilities, as well as the potential to live a hit with a little extra boost into its HP, I think pushes Dodrio over the edge. It's already pretty good. There are a bunch of flying types out there that sort of outclassed Dodrio, but upping his speed tier and giving him the ability to passively boost his attack once he knocks out Pokemon is really, really huge for it, as well as all the coverage moves that we gave it. This makes Dodrio pretty unique, pretty thematic, I think, all the kicking moves as well as Compound Eyes with all 3 of its heads, and separates him a lot from, every other flying type. There's so many flying types. It's hard to separate them all. Normal flying particularly is a really, really overused type, but I think that Dodrio does it relatively well. So that is where we're probably going to do it for this week's video. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you'd do to Farfetch'd. Tell me what you'd do to the Rabidashes. Tell me what you'd do to Dodrio. I want this to be as interactive and community-based as possible. If you've got ideas, if you think you don't like what I did, by all means, tell me in the comment section what you would think would make Farfetch'd or Dodrio better. Tell me if you liked things. Tell me if you didn't like things. Also, let me know if the format of the video works for you guys. I've been covering like 5 to 6 Pokemon per video, and I think that's relatively fair. But I could always cover more or less. I sort of debated in my head whether I wanted to do individual videos for each individual Pokemon and go way more in depth into it, or sort of this style. I think I'm probably going to stick with this style, but let me know. Again, thank you guys for watching. Till next time.